What's going on, y'all? My name is Tommy. Well, welcome back to the channel. This week on Min-Maxing for Fun and Profit by request, we are converting the Drop Trooper from Warhammer 40k. We want to be able to fly, we want to be able to disrupt the backline, we want to hang out in combat for a few rounds before the rest of the squad gets here. Will this build please the Emperor? Will this build have good DACA? Will this build have a bunch of Warhammer references that, like, can't mesh? Yeah, it's gonna... It really is. Remember, if you're liking what you're seeing, to like, subscribe, ding the bell. Stay caught up on all your stuff. My god, this necklace is really jangly. Remember, Patreon gets you a bunch of cool shit and can help you play this at 1E tables as well. For now, let's dive in. Okie dokie. So before we talk about the exactly how, let us first discuss the why, because I think this build is really, really cool. Making something that can attack by itself, disrupt the enemy, and give everybody else in the party time to heal, buff, whatever it is they need before battle is joined can oftentimes be the difference between life or death in a given encounter. I think this is especially true in lower levels when several classes before they are casting their spells quickened need that wind up time to buff, or even like the action economy of opening or closing doors can be so huge in disrupting enemy reinforcements from coming in, making sure in bigger maps like a castle courtyard kind of thing that the whole team can get in at once in a more coordinated effort, whereas otherwise it might be a couple people raising a gate while one person runs in under enemy fire. This gives you a little more time to be a little more concentrated, be a little more organized, and then when battle is joined for everyone else, everybody else can use their resources a little more sparingly in longer, more knockdown, drag out kind of engagements where there are going to be several encounters in a day, you don't have time to rest, so on and so forth. With that in mind, today for our race, we will be building around an Aasimar. We will be trading our spell-like ability, if our kind and merciful GMs will allow it, for the Aasimar's ability to begin with wings and a relatively slow fly speed compared to the other flying things you can play in 1E Pathfinder, but like Aasimar feels very on brand for this. I think the Emperor only approves of the celestial beings, right? The Archon-blooded will do us just fine. The bonus to Constitution and Wisdom looks good on everyone, and looks especially good on us because Wisdom is a thing we definitely are going to enjoy in this build. For our weapon of choice, that big angry two-handed weapon to go swinging at people, it was a weird choice. I made this build like 3 times, cycling around different weapon options and things. Ultimately, per the request, wanting a two-handed weapon, today we are going with, don't call it an axe, don't call it a musket, it's, well, 2 of them all together at once, an axe musket. Battle axes can be wielded in 2 hands, and though the D8 damage is not as much as the 3d6 butchering axe, this also gives us a ranged option that targets the often much lower touch AC without having to fumble around for different weapons. It also enables a couple of really cool feat interactions, and like if I'm building around 40k, I feel like I needed a gun, right? To facilitate its use, we'll be today playing on 2 levels of the Inquisitor and 18 levels of the War Priest, a favorite build of the Black Dragon gaming nerds. Let me tell you what. Our Inquisitor double dip will give us a bunch of things. Via the Sanctified Slayer archetype, we'll be able to grab Study Target as opposed to a shorter term ticking buff to make sure our attacks are landing when we're down to business. We also will trade out our domain for the Black Powder Inquisition to get us proficiency with that axe musket we want to fly around and swing, as well as gunsmithing. Eventually this will get us wisdom to our initiative, and it will from jump give us wisdom to our knowledge checks to identify those things we're soloing, which is so huge when you're going at it by yourself. You gotta know what is the easiest target to hit, what is the lowest save, what is the general combat routine. Whatever the GM will give you, more information, more good. Our War Priest will be grabbing the Divine Champion archetype, one of my very favoriteest. It trades out a bunch of its bonus feats for, first and foremost, at level 3 or 5 for us, Deific Obedience, very, very early. It also gives us an ability to choose a faction-based entity within the game and get a scaling pseudo-favorite enemy against it, and the ability to burn Fervor to cast the spell-like abilities from our Obedience. What deity, you ask? Well, today I can think of no more fitting thing for flying down soloing a bunch of things than the General of Vengeance, Rigathiel. The Obedience from level 3 will give us a +4 sacred bonus on saving throws against spells and effects cast by evil creatures, so I'm making the broad strokes assumption that we will be fighting the forces of evil for this build. A lot of times I feel like you are in Pathfinder though, so it should be fine. Eventually, though it will take a hot sec to get there, that sacred bonus equal to half our hit dice on damage rolls made with slashing weapons, like, axes, against the last creatures who have physically wounded us. makes for our combat turns being very swingy, targeting just all across the board rather than focus firing for extra value. But in a world where everyone's going to be attacking you and only you for a little bit, I think this pans out real well. And DR10 only broken by good almost feels just downright unbeatable. Unless, you know, somehow you piss off the angels and then bad things happen. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. The General of Edgelords and also Vengeance will grant us access to, in our case, we'll be choosing the Destruction and Nobility blessings. Nobility functioning as an alright buff for the rest of the team when they show up, but I think the destructive attacks from the Destruction blessing is the real takeaway for this one. For a minute, which is a long time in combat, getting a morale bonus on weapon damage equal to half your level, stacking with a lot of other things we do, helps to drive home very hard that central theme of I'm gonna show up, I'm gonna find the biggest or scariest threat, which truthfully is often spellcasters. I'm gonna get rid of them, and I'm either going to fly away if it gets too hairy, or I'll use things like Fervor's ability to heal myself, swift action spells to hurt a bunch of people, to hang out until everybody else shows up to fight a much more weakened overall threat. For the traits today, Axe to Grind gives us a +1 trait damage bonus against foes who are threatened by only us, so most of the time. And then alongside that, can't believe I'm telling you to take these, but Rich Parents and Chosen Child to start with a base gold of 1800. Why? Because guns are expensive, y'all. Pick the drawback that is the most fitting for your campaign. For our stat priority, we're looking at, most importantly, first and foremost, strength. We will be hitting with it, followed immediately by wisdom to fill basically everything else. Our casting, our per day uses of abilities, our knowledge checks, our will saves, so on and so forth. Dexterity and constitution are very important stats as well. Get them as high as you reasonably can. Our ranged attacks will most often be targeting touch AC, so you don't need to super prioritize your dex, but like you want a little bit of reflex, a little bit of initiative, so on and so forth. And con, because, you know, prevents you from dying. Intelligence and charisma we can just go ahead and dump to the floor. But with that in mind, let's talk about some feats. At level 1, probably my favorite feat in Pathfinder 1st Edition, Opening Volley, my favorite surprise round feat, and because we're flying and because stealth is a class skill for us, using things like trees or buildings or the fact that humanoids don't look up to make sure that when the combat starts, it starts when you wanted to, with everyone very surprised about your presence. Whenever you deal damage with, in our case, a gun, you gain a +4 circumstance bonus on the next melee attack roll you make against that same opponent, which must occur before the end of your next turn. So you shoot, initiative is rolled, hopefully you land somewhere at the top, so before they get a chance to organize, you can just fold your wings, dive, swing the axe. Oops, now they're bleeding on the ground. At level 3, our War Priest will give us weapon focus, I guess the firearm weapon group for purposes of elephant in the room. Oh yeah, follow this card right up here. That's super important. We're definitely using that, and my own variations on it, allowing feats with the improved and greater versions of themselves to automatically upgrade as soon as we qualify. So, you know, at level 3, you have access to Cleave, which of course, as a standard action, allows you to make a single attack at full BAB against a foe within reach. If you hit, you deal damage normally, and can make an extra attack against a foe that is adjacent to the first, also within reach. You can only do the 1 extra per round, but when you're diving down, I feel like a lot of people are going to be swarming around you pretty reliably, and therefore standing in cleave formation. Which leads right into cleaving finish next up. When you kill a thing, you get a free attack against another thing within your reach. And this is the level where our Deific Obedience comes online. Next, because oftentimes we'll be wanting to do a single amount of damage to one target very quickly, and we don't have a full base attack, we're gonna go the Vital Strike route. For extra damage dice on our axe or gun when we are axing or gunning, we'll go into all-consuming swing afterwards, which allows us to apply the Vital Strike damage to our cleave ability. This also forces us to take an amount of damage equal to the extra damage dealt by Vital Strike, which in a really weird universe might turn into you get a big bonus on damage against yourself because of the obedience. That's feels on brand for the grim dark of 40k. Don't hurt yourself, kids. But when you inevitably do from using this, remember that a War Priest can, as a swift action, heal themselves in a lot of different ways, be that using their Fervor ability to just have a not lay on hands, or using their Fervor ability to cast a spell they have prepared as a swift action. Next up, Devastating Strike gives us a scaling bonus on weapon damage dice for each iterative of Vital Strike we get. I think we're seeing the theme here, right? Hit them with axe real hard, do lots of damage, soften up as many targets as possible, then when the rest of the squad shows up, they can go from there. The rest of the feats will shore up our ranged ability, we'll take Rapid Reload. This plus paper cartridges should allow you to reload a musket as a free action. It does increase your misfire chance, but you'll be fine.
The Emperor protects.
Precise shot lets you shoot into melee, so when the barbarian catches up, you can fly away and shoot down without worry of reprisal after taking several rounds of reprisal. Far shot raises the range increments for when we are firing at dragons and things at high level play. Then lastly, improved initiative to make sure we're still at the end of the game, being the one who's able to first land down, line up, and get down to business. For our spells, of which there are so many from the Inquisitor side, the side that will have considerably less overall spellcasting, we don't talk about it as much as we should on the channel, but Shield of Faith's +2 deflection bonus to AC at minutes per level. Probably the difference between life and death when way too many people are attacking you. And alongside it, what is probably one of my favorite spells in the game that I think literally every class has access to, even like adepts have access to cause fear. For 1d4 rounds, a creature becoming frightened or a creature having to run away from you, disrupt their own formation, can be just as devastating as killing important targets. When they're now several rooms down, cowering in a corner, or god, ideally running back into the party who can just kind of catch and kill them. Yeah, no, that's super tasty. Even on a succeeded save, they become shaken for a round, which, you know, might keep you alive. I really wish we could take Cause Fear's bigger brother Fear, but it just doesn't appear on the War Priest list, much to my shame. Speaking of, for our War Priest spells, there are a lot of War Priest videos on the channel. You can data mine for specific things for this. There are a lot of spells that I think are considered staples for that class, like Stunning Barrier, Divine Favor, Prayer, so on and so forth. Greater Stunning Barrier feels real good if the rest of the team shows up and things are just stunned standing all around you. But for the sake of putting content out that I haven't already put out, we're going to talk about some newer things today. All of these spells being spells that can abuse the War Priest's ability to cast spells that target themselves as a swift action. First, Wave Form. It's a 4th level spell for us. It transforms us into a wave of water and surges us at up to twice our base movement speed. This movement doesn't provoke, and up to a 15-foot wide and 15-foot tall line, which is immune to weapon attacks, which deals 46 points of bludgeoning damage with no save, and a reflex save to avoid knocking creatures prone, which is incredible disruption, a lot of damage to a lot of things, and more importantly, if we're the only one who showed up to the battlefield while everyone else is picking locks, doing knowledge checks, buffing, or what have you, we don't have to worry about catching allies in limited burst wave things. It's for that same token that I came dangerously close to dropping the two-handed weapon and just showing up with a blunderbuss and having a cone weapon that did a bunch of damage to a lot of targets. But, you know, requests say two-handed weapon. Well, I guess a blunderbuss is a two-handed weapon. Damn, what could have been? Anyway, by that same token, Hallucinogenic Smoke. Again, 4th level spell for us, presuming we cast and immediately exhale the smoke. It's a fort save in a 30-foot cone that nauseates creatures for 1 round per caster level, or sicken for 1d4 on a successful save. Again, very huge debuff that we don't necessarily have to worry about where we're pointing it so we don't catch our friends, which makes it double good. Burst of Radiance feels like another very good start the surprise round off spell. A 10-foot radius burst with long range. Blinds creatures for 1d4 rounds or dazzles them if they pass their save. Evil creatures in the area, I'm presuming you're fighting a lot of them, take 1d4 points of damage per caster level, whether or not they pass the save. 5d4 flat damage to a bunch of targets is a great way to soften up a combat before a combat begins, and if a bunch of them start unable to see what you're doing, well, so much the better. The rest of our magic crosses into a very deep, if your GM will allow it kind of thing. The remaining 3 spells are typically only available to certain worshippers of certain deities, and one of them straight up has the evil tag, but they either feel very on flavor for either the deity or the build, or really, like, I'm not sure Regathiel cares very much as long as the job of crushing your enemies, seeing them driven before you, and being sure they were horrible, terrible people before you did it happened, right? First, Rovagug's Fury makes a minor earthquake that can trip up creatures. You make a combat maneuver check and apply the result against the CMD of everyone in a 30-foot cone-shaped burst. It doesn't provoke, it can trip any creature touching the ground regardless of size, and also might fuck up the ground, or, you know, might cause people to burn actions picking themselves off the ground. Screaming Flames with repetitive casting will probably cause Regathiel to be very mad at you and lose your magic, but the deity who has fought their inner evil and is fire-themed, it seems on brand. a little bit of chaos doesn't hurt, right? Don't tell the Emperor.
Heretics.
As standard action, this makes a 15-foot long, 10-foot high sheet of fire, much like waveform, that moves out at a reflex save for 1d8 points of fire damage, maxing at 5d8. Creatures that take that fire damage must will save or take either 1d3 points of wisdom damage or 1d6 points of sanity damage. I really like this spell as a narrative piece when you really need to go to 11 and burn the heretics and your friends aren't there to see it, or they would poo-poo you and then you have to live with that afterwards. Spicy. And then lastly, we're gonna pop over to Zon-Kuthon. We're gonna say, hey, this spell's really on flavor for a build that is incentivized to take damage and then gets very angry about it. Sadomasochism. Another spell we can cast as a swift action at minutes per level. Anytime you are dealt damage, your attacker must roll twice on the damage dice and take the higher roll, but they must also will save or become demoralized. Core Rulebook 99 tracks you to the OG description of Intimidate. This is just shaken for a round. God, they could have said that. This also allows us to roll our damage twice and take the higher when we're swinging our axe through our enemies. And again, I wish this one had the evil tag too. It would feel really fun to play with, I think, in the divine nature of someone and their arc of lines between war for the greater good and war crimes. I'd say the spell has good DACA, but the Emperor is not about that. For our key items, the big six are always really important. You can follow this card right up here to catch those. Again, paper cartridges, very good as soon as you can get them to decrease the reloading time of our weapon. Alongside it, a couple of really weird things that we don't talk about but are really great here. First up, my favoriteest of all the pay-to-win shop items they ever made. At 50 gold a pop for iron ones, up to 150 gold for adamantine ones, pellet grenades. These bad boys go off in a 10-foot radius burst with a reflex DC 15 to have, dealing 3d6 points of damage, a d6 of it bludgeoning, a d6 of it piercing, and a d6 of it fire. At low level play, 3d6 damage to multiple targets is a lot. These will reliably clear rooms in the beginning of the game, and later on, a little bit of adamantine that will ignore the hardness of everything in the room when the pellets are going into doors and shit, helps shatter the lock for everybody else to get through the door later on. By a similar token, the Necklace of Fireballs, depending on its type, makes a boatload of DC 14 fireballs, ranging from 2d6 to 10d6. And the fun part about these is, should you fail against a magical fire attack, or should this item be hit by too much fire, the whole kit and caboodle goes off at once. So later on, when you're protection from energying, resisting energy, with good reflex saves, which will be very easy for us later on, riding through this to take no damage while lots and lots of people in a 20-foot radius take even more, it's real good. And then lastly, for a little bit of low-level tech, a snap leaf. When we begin to fall, whether that be we go to 0 hit points while we're flying around, or maybe we just voluntarily quit flying because we're super compromised, we can spend an immediate action to snap and destroy the snap leaf to gain the benefits of a feather fall and an invisibility for when we just really need to go to ground. But in the optimized party, this feels very light punishery. It doesn't have the reach or the combat reflexes you would want it to, but it's self-sufficient enough to show up and do a bunch of damage while everybody else is showing up and doing the things that they're supposed to be doing while they are never ever under threat. Where to play this is a little more complicated though. By nature of the build, we want to be in combat by ourselves for a couple of rounds, which at the table means people are watching you play while they're waiting for their chance to play, right? Some people are just not going to be down with that. However, if groups all consent to it, any campaign that has several mission-based things, several side objectives, several things that need to be done in addition to kill all the guys, take all their loot, go sell it, lather, rinse, repeat. Very happy to see a build like this. Off the top of my head, this would be pretty neat for Iron Fang invasions, castle crawling that it often gets up to, same with Wrath of the Righteous, for the same reasons. Landing this on a boat in Skull and Shackles while the party's boat is still catching up can serve double or triple duty if you can manage to also disable the ship, therefore it is taken before anybody else even gets there. Rise of the Rune Lords and Carrion Crown both have several castle-based dungeons. Particularly earlier on in Rune Lords, there are a lot of lower intelligence foes that you could very easily kite around with this, providing a distraction to sneak into an occupied fort, or convince a bunch of trolls that maybe they shouldn't be standing outside the front door, or maybe kite those trolls into way too many elemental traps, or a MacGuffin monster at the end of Book 2 of Carrying Ground, which is a discussion that is beyond the pale of this video, and that's all the time I have for this one. What do y'all think? Let me know down in the comments, as always. Thank y'all so much for watching. Next week, we're diving into Dark Archive for a look at the 2nd edition Psychic. Until then, my friends, we'll see you next time.
He who stands with me shall be my brother.